The sun had not even risen on the horizon yet, when Camila Alvarez was already up in the small kitchen of the apartment, preparing breakfast for her family. Her skilled fingers precisely cut fruits, while the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the cramped but cozy environment. She smiled as she heard the sound of the shower, knowing that Javier was preparing for another exhausting day on the construction site. Despite all the difficulties they faced, there was something special about their morning routine, a feeling of gratitude and hope that Camila cultivated every day by looking at her husband and son, the two people who gave meaning to her life away from her homeland. "Mom, is Dad going to be home later today?" asked little Mateo, rubbing his sleepy eyes as he sat at the kitchen table, already wearing his school uniform but with disheveled hair. Camila approached her son, tenderly combing the rebellious strands with her fingers, and placed a kiss on his forehead. "Yes, my love. Your father is working on a big project, so he'll be home a little later in the next few days, but he promised that on Sunday we'll all go to the park," she responded, trying to hide the concern in her voice. The new construction project was on a very tall building, and Javier had commented on the precarious safety conditions, but they needed that extra money to fulfill their dream of buying their own home. Javier appeared in the kitchen with his hair still damp, wearing his work clothes already worn out by time and daily effort. His tired eyes lit up when he saw his wife and son at the table. "Good morning, my loves," he said, enveloping Camila in a tight embrace as if he wanted to memorize the subtle fragrance emanating from her hair. There was something different about that morning, an intensity in Javier's gaze that Camila couldn't decipher. "I promise that after this project, I'll look for something less dangerous," he whispered in her ear before sitting down for breakfast. Camila nodded, feeling an inexplicable tightness in her chest, but she pushed the feeling away, convincing herself that it was just the accumulated fatigue of the past few months. Breakfast continued with laughter and plans for the future. Javier told funny stories about his co-workers, making Mateo laugh out loud at the exaggerated impersonations. "When I grow up, I want to be strong like you, Dad," the boy said with admiration, making Javier swallow hard, visibly emotional. "You'll be much more than that, my son. You'll study, have a better profession, and never have to climb dangerous scaffolds," he replied, exchanging a meaningful look with Camila. That was the silent pact between them, sacrificing themselves so that Mateo would have opportunities they never had. Javier worked on the construction of the new skyscraper that rose imposingly on the city's horizon, a colossus of glass and steel that promised to be the tallest building in the region. The work on the 50th floor required not only physical strength, but also nerves of steel to deal with the dizzying heights and the increasingly dangerous conditions imposed by supervisors who prioritized speed over safety. That morning, something seemed different in Javier's eyes as he said goodbye, a silent omen that Camila tried to ignore as she watched her husband leave. He had mentioned that the safety cables were worn out and that several workers had already filed formal complaints, all ignored by the superiors who insisted on meeting tight deadlines, even if it meant exposing the workers to risks that would never be allowed for local workers. That unequal treatment was just one of the countless injustices they had to endure in silence, fearing the loss of their jobs if they spoke out. When it was time for Javier to leave, he hugged his son with unusual strength and then held Camila's face between his calloused hands. "You are the strongest and bravest woman I've ever known, Camila Alvarez. Never forget that," he said, kissing her deeply, as if it were the first or the last time. Camila felt a chill run down her spine, but she smiled and adjusted the collar of his shirt. "Be careful and come back to us," she replied, repeating the same words as every day, without imagining that would be the last time she would say them. The morning continued its normal course. Camila took Mateo to school and then went shopping at the local market, where she chatted animatedly with other women like her. She planned to prepare Javier's favorite dish for dinner, as a small celebration for the extra pay he would receive that week. It was when she was selecting fresh tomatoes that her phone rang. The number was unknown, and the deep voice on the other end of the line made her blood run cold. "Mrs. Alvarez, this is Central Hospital. I'm sorry to inform you, but your husband fell from a height of approximately 15 floors when the scaffolding he was working on collapsed. He suffered multiple fractures and internal bleeding. The medical team is doing everything possible, but his condition is extremely critical," explained the voice on the other end of the line, while Camila felt as if the ground was also crumbling beneath her feet. The world around her suddenly seemed distant, the sounds of the market turning into an indistinct hum as her body trembled uncontrollably. "But he was wearing safety equipment. He always wears it. He's so careful," Camila mumbled, unable to fully process the devastating news she had just received. The elderly woman selling the tomatoes noticed her despair and approached her, holding her by the shoulders when her legs threatened to give way. The following minutes passed in a confused blur of automatic movements. Camilla left her purchases scattered on the grocery store floor and ran through the streets as if her own life depended on it. Her thoughts were fragmented. Images of Javier smiling that morning, mingling with terrifying visions of him bloodied, fighting for his life on an operating table. The weight of the cell phone in her hand felt unbearable, as if the object held within itself all the horror of that news. She tried to organize her thoughts enough to call Rosa, her only trusted friend, while running towards the bus stop. "Rosa, please pick up Mateo from school. Javier, an accident. I'm going to the hospital," she said between sobs, her voice choked by the desperate crying that finally managed to escape her throat. The journey to the hospital seemed endless, every red light an additional torture, every stop a cruel test of her sanity. Camilla clutched the crucifix she wore around her neck, a gift from her late mother, and murmured prayers, promising sacrifices and miracles in exchange for her husband's life. Faith, which had always been her safe haven in difficult times, now seemed insufficient to contain the terror growing in her chest. Images of a future without Javier began to invade her mind, and she fiercely fought them off, refusing to accept that devastating possibility. "He will survive. He has to survive for Mateo, for me, for our dreams," she repeated to herself like a desperate mantra. The hospital finally appeared on the horizon, an imposing building of concrete and glass that now held the fate of her family within its walls. Camilla threw some crumpled bills at the driver and ran towards the emergency entrance, her heart beating so violently it seemed to want to escape her chest. The hospital reception was crowded. Injured people, anxious families, the organized chaos of human suffering. A stern-faced nurse intercepted Camilla when she screamed Javier's name amid desperate sobs. "Mrs. Alvarez, please come with me," the professional said, guiding her away from the crowd towards a quieter hallway. That gesture, that removal from the public area, almost made Camilla's legs give way. She knew enough about hospitals to understand that news given in private rooms was rarely good. "My husband, is he?" she tried to ask, unable to complete the sentence her brain refused to form. The nurse gently squeezed her arm with that professional compassion Camilla would learn to hate in the days to come. "The doctor will speak with you in a moment." "They're still with him in the operating room," she replied, leading her to a small waiting room reserved for families of critically ill patients. What Camilla didn't know as she crossed that threshold was that her life was about to change forever, in ways she could never have imagined. Camilla's eyes burned as she stood motionless beside the gurney where Javier was fighting for his life. Tubes and wires extended all over his body, connecting him to machines that emitted rhythmic sounds, the only indication that there was still life in that body torn apart by the accident. The face she loved so much was unrecognizable under the bruises and swelling, a white sheet partially covering the bloodied bandages. The doctors had allowed her in for just a few minutes, a gesture of compassion that now seemed more torture than solace. Every artificial breath, every beep of the machines was like a knife piercing Camilla's heart, reminding her that each second could be the last. "My love, don't leave me. Please, fight. Mateo needs you." "I need you," she whispered, holding Javier's cold hand between hers, searching for any sign of response. Her tears fell onto her husband's pale skin, mingling with the blood that still stained his cuticles. The calloused hands that had so often caressed her now lay inert, devoid of that vital strength that had always characterized Javier. "We'll build our house, remember? You promised to take Mateo to the park on Sunday. He's waiting for you. You can't leave now. You can't abandon us like this." The heart monitor began emitting irregular signals, and a medical team burst into the room, pushing Camilla aside. She refused to leave, clinging to the bed rail with a strength born of the deepest despair. "He's all I have. I can't leave him. Save my husband, please," she screamed, as a nurse gently tried to lead her out. From the doorway, Camilla watched in horror as the doctors performed resuscitation maneuvers, Javier's body violently arching with each defibrillator discharge. A desperate prayer sprang from her lips, a bargain with every divine force she knew. She promised sacrifices, eternal devotion, anything in exchange for his life. Time seemed to have distorted in that emergency room. Minutes dragged like hours as the doctors fought against the inevitability of death. Camilla could hear fragments of medical terms: internal bleeding, multiple trauma, organ failure, words that turned into death sentences for her dreams and hopes. When finally the doctor stepped away from the bed, removing his bloodied gloves with a defeated motion, Camilla already knew, even before he opened his mouth. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Alvarez. We did everything we could, but the injuries were too severe. Your husband has passed away." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow, making her double over, as if she'd been punched in the stomach. A primal, ancestral scream escaped her throat, a sound that carried all the weight of loss, fear, and loneliness that now stretched before her like an infinite abyss. Stumbling to the stretcher, Camilla hugged Javier's still warm body, cradling him as she did with Mateo when he had nightmares. "Don't leave me, please, don't leave me," she repeated, as the cruel reality of death slowly seeped into her consciousness. How would she live without him? How would she raise their son alone? How would she bear the void Javier left in their lives? The next day, the grey sky poured a fine rain over the small cemetery, where a small group of people gathered around the dark wooden coffin. Camilla remained motionless, her body rigid like a statue, as she held Mateo's small, trembling hand. The boy, dressed in a borrowed black suit that seemed to swallow him whole, looked confused at the coffin where his father rested. His swollen eyes from so much crying alternated between his mother's devastated face and the wooden box that contained the body of his hero. The incomprehension stamped on his childish face made the scene even more harrowing for the few friends and co-workers who had come to pay their last respects to Javier Alvarez. "Mother, why are they putting my dad in that box? He won't be able to breathe in there," Mateo whispered, tugging at Camilla's black dress, his innocent words provoking a new wave of tears from those present. Camilla felt as if each word from her son was a knife piercing her chest. How could she explain death to a child who had barely begun to understand the concept of life? Rosa, standing beside Camilla as a silent pillar of support, gently squeezed her shoulder, trying to convey strength where there was none. The elderly priest, a man with a kind face, recited prayers that seemed distant, words that should bring comfort, but were lost to the wind before reaching Camilla's shattered heart. "Your father is sleeping a very special sleep, my love. A sleep from which he will not wake, but where there is no pain or suffering," Camilla replied, her voice choked by the permanent lump that had lodged in her throat since receiving the fateful news. The words sounded empty even to herself, unable to capture the magnitude of the loss they had suffered. How could she translate into simple words the irreversible disappearance of someone who was the center of their universe? Mateo tightened his grip on his mother's hand, tears silently streaming down his round face, as if he understood, even in his innocence, that something terrible and irrevocable had happened. The moment to lower the casket into the grave arrived, bringing with it a new wave of despair that threatened to topple Camilla. Her knees weakened, and for an instant, it seemed she would collapse right there on the damp earth that would soon cover the body of the man she loved. Rosa quickly supported her, holding her by the shoulders as Mateo, frightened by his mother's state, began to cry uncontrollably, clinging to Camilla's legs as if fearing she too might disappear at any moment. It was a childish fear, but terribly real. The fear of losing the only safe haven he had left in a world that had suddenly become incomprehensible and threatening. "Daddy! Daddy! I don't want you to go! Please, come home with us!" Mateo cried, trying to break free from Camilla to run towards the casket that was slowly descending into the grave. Camilla held him firmly, kneeling to embrace him with all the strength she still had in her exhausted body. Her son's despair was like an amplified mirror of her own pain, raw, visceral, unbearable. The tears she had tried to hold back throughout the ceremony finally overflowed, mingling with her son's in that desperate embrace that united the survivors of a family shattered by tragedy. The earth began to fall onto the casket, each handful sounding like thunder in Camilla's ears, each movement of the shovel sealing not only Javier's fate, but also the dreams and plans they had built together. The future they had imagined evaporated like the morning mist under the relentless sun of reality. Images of the past paraded through Camilla's mind. The first meeting, the simple wedding, Mateo's birth, the daily sacrifices, the small joys, the promises of a better future. Now everything was reduced to that terrible moment, that grave that swallowed not only Javier, but also a vital part of herself that would never be recovered. When the ceremony finally ended, the few present approached to offer condolences, well-intentioned words but empty in the face of the immensity of that loss. Camilla and Mateo remained there, hand in front of the freshly closed grave, unable to take the final step, to turn their backs and move on. How could they continue living when such an essential part of them was now buried in that piece of earth? The question hovered in the air like a merciless shadow, with no possible answer, as mother and son contemplated the beginning of a journey they were unprepared for, the long and painful crossing through the valley of Javier Alvarez's eternal absence. The days after the funeral dragged on like an eternity for Camila. The walls of the small apartment seemed to close in on her, each corner holding memories of Javier that now turned into stabs of pain. His clothes still hanging in the closet, the pair of slippers by the bed, his favorite cup on the kitchen shelf, ordinary objects that had become monuments to an unbearable absence. Mateo wandered silently through the rooms like a little ghost, his once cheerful face now marked by a sadness no child should know. At night, Camila would find him asleep, clinging to his father's favorite shirt, the fabric already damp from the tears shed, until sleep finally overcame him. "You need to eat something, Camila. You're wasting away before my eyes," Rosa insisted, placing a plate of food on the kitchen table. The friend came every day, bringing meals, helping with household chores, trying to fill with her presence the abyss that Javier's death had left. But nothing seemed to reach Camila, who now existed in a state of torpor, moving like an automaton, mechanically performing only the essential tasks to keep Mateo fed and clean. "I can't, Rosa. It's as if my body won't accept anything. As if I no longer have the right to live when Javier cannot," she murmured, pushing the plate away with a weak gesture. "Think of your son, Camila. He has already lost his father. He cannot lose his mother too," Rosa replied, her voice firm but compassionate. Camila raised her eyes, meeting her friend's determined gaze. "Do you think I don't think of him every second? That it doesn't tear me apart inside to see him searching for his father, calling for him during nightmares? But how can I be strong for Mateo when I feel so completely shattered?" she asked, the words coming out choked by sobs she could no longer contain. Rosa embraced her, allowing Camila to finally break down, her body racked by a violent and primal cry that came from the depths of her wounded soul. The nights were the worst time. After putting Mateo to bed, Camila would lie on the side of the bed that still held the contour of Javier's body, inhaling his scent that was gradually fading from the pillows. Amid the lonely darkness, she relived the last kiss, the last smile, the last time he had walked through that door, unaware that he would never return. Loneliness enveloped her like an icy shroud, and the future stretched out before her like an endless desert, arid of joy or hope. How would she move forward? How would she find the strength to face the world without Javier by her side? In the third week after Javier's death, the financial reality imposed itself on Camila with the brutality of an iron fist. Sitting at the small kitchen table, she stared once again at the overdue bills scattered before her. The envelopes piled up like silent accusations, while the little money she had left was running out. Camila opened the coffee can where they kept their emergency savings, finding only a few crumpled bills and a handful of coins, nothing that could face the impending avalanche of obligations that loomed relentlessly. "Mum, is there no more cereal?" Mateo asked, opening the kitchen cabinet and finding only a few packages of pasta and rice. His sad little face, already marked by the loss of his father, now showed the first signs of material deprivation. Camila felt her heart ache painfully. How to explain to a child that there was no money to buy his favorite foods, that each meal now had to be carefully calculated to last as long as possible? "Today we'll eat something else, my love. How about a sandwich?" she replied, forcing a smile as she took out the last 2 loaves of bread from the package, ignoring her own hunger that had been gnawing at her stomach for days. That night, after putting Mateo to bed, Camila opened the medicine cabinet and found that her son's asthma medication was almost gone. The nearly empty bottle seemed to mock her, reminding her of yet another responsibility for which she had no resources. In the refrigerator, the once full shelves now displayed ever-growing empty spaces. The milk had run out that morning, and there were no fresh fruits or vegetables, only leftovers that she was saving to ensure Mateo had something to eat. Camila looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror, noticing how her clothes were already looser, how her face had lost its glow, furrowed by deep dark circles and worry lines. The silence of the apartment at night was oppressive, filled only by the occasional sounds of Mateo's breathing in the room next door. Camila opened the dresser drawer where she kept important documents, finding the dreams they had built with Javier, blueprints of the small house they had planned to buy one day, brochures of the private school they dreamed of sending Mateo when they could afford it, pamphlets of places they had intended to visit together, papers that were now nothing but painful reminders of a future that would never come to fruition. Reality stared at her with cold, relentless eyes. She was a woman alone, with a young child to raise. The savings were disappearing quickly, the bills were piling up, and basic necessities were already starting to run out. As devastating as grief was, it did not have the luxury of consuming all her energy now. Survival imposed itself as a brutal and immediate demand. Camilla put the documents back in the drawer, wiping away the tears that insisted on falling. For Mateo, for that piece of Javier that still lived, she needed to find a way. She needed to find a job. She needed to find a way to survive. The weeks dragged on painfully as Camilla roamed the city streets with makeshift resumes in hand, knocking on door after door in search of any job opportunity. Her face, still marked by recent grief, tried to force a confident smile that never reached her eyes as she handed out papers at restaurants, department stores, laundromats, and small offices. The routine was always the same. She woke up before sunrise, prepared a thin coffee to save what little was left, got Mateo ready to leave him with Rosa, and went out to face a new day of silent or explicit rejections. Managers looked at her nearly empty resume with expressions ranging from pity to distrust, some promising to call if a vacancy arose, others not even bothering to disguise their lack of interest in an immigrant woman without proven experience, with a young child to raise. "We need someone who can work overtime when necessary," explained the manager of a bakery, quickly handing Camilla's resume back with a gesture that revealed his discomfort. A single mother wouldn't have that flexibility. It was always the same story. Either she didn't have enough experience, or she didn't have references, or she didn't have total availability, or simply didn't have the profile they were looking for, a euphemism she had learned to translate as, "We don't want someone like you." Each rejection was like a new blow to her already shaken self-esteem. Each closed door increased the weight of the responsibility she felt for Mateo, whose needs would not wait for the world's goodwill. At night, after putting her son to bed, Camilla counted and recounted the few remaining bills, calculating how much longer they could survive before the inevitable eviction became a reality. "I didn't find anything today either," Camilla confessed to Rosa, as she picked up the sleeping Mateo from her friend's mother's arms. Her voice sounded exhausted, defeated, so different from the vibrant woman she had been by Javier's side. Rosa watched with growing concern the discouragement that was beginning to take over her friend, the ever-deepening dark circles, the clothes that seemed bigger every week as Camilla lost weight from the combination of stress and inadequate nutrition. "I tried that new grocery store that opened on 5th Avenue, but they said they only hire people with previous experience in the field. How am I going to get experience if no one gives me the first opportunity?" she questioned, frustration evident in every word, in the way her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Mateo in her arms. The financial situation was deteriorating rapidly, like an invisible hemorrhage draining the small family's last resources. The landlord had already made 2 visits to collect the overdue rent, the last with veiled threats of eviction. The electricity bill had been paid on the very last possible day, thanks to a small loan from Rosa, which the friend could barely afford herself. Camilla had sold the watch Javier had given her as a gift on their first wedding anniversary, and then the small television that was Mateo's only source of entertainment during the long afternoons at home. Each sacrificed personal item was like ripping out a piece of memory, a small additional death added to the irreparable loss of Javier. Survival had become a cruel math of calculated deprivations and constant sacrifices. "Mother, why don't we go to the park like before?" Mateo asked on a particularly difficult afternoon, his innocent little voice carrying an observation that pierced Camilla's heart like a poisoned arrow. The park was a few blocks away, and the truth was that she simply didn't have the energy to walk there after whole days roaming the city in search of a job. "I'm a little tired today, my love. I promise we'll go on the weekend," she replied, swallowing the lump in her throat as she stroked her son's hair. What she couldn't say was that she was saving every ounce of energy for the job search, that her feet ached in her cheap shoes, that her body protested against the inadequate nutrition of the past few weeks. The guilt of not being able to provide her son with even a simple walk in the park was another invisible weight on her shoulders already bowed by grief and worry. Rosa observed everything in silence, her heart tight for the situation of her friend, whom she considered a sister. While working as a receptionist at a small medical clinic, she kept her ears open for any mention of job openings, discreetly asked patients if they knew of any opportunities, and checked the classifieds daily for something that could help Camilla. It was during a casual conversation with her cousin Lucia, who had worked for years as a housekeeper at the luxurious Imperial Hotel, that the first glimmer of hope in weeks emerged. One of the longest-serving maids is retiring at the end of the month. The hotel is looking for someone to replace her, Lucia commented, unaware of the impact that information would have. Rosa immediately thought of Camilla. The work was hard, but the pay was decent, included basic benefits, and most importantly, offered stability. "Camilla, I have news that could change everything," Rosa exclaimed as she entered her friend's small apartment that same night, her face lit by a contagious hope. Camilla raised her eyes from the classified she was studying by the dim light of an almost burned-out lamp, her tired gaze silently questioning her friend's enthusiasm. "My cousin Lucia works at the Imperial Hotel, that luxury one downtown. There's going to be an opening for a maid, and she managed to schedule an interview for you tomorrow at 9 in the morning, Rosa announced, holding Camilla's hands in hers. For a moment, Camilla didn't react, as if her exhausted brain couldn't fully process that information. A job at a luxury hotel, a real interview, not just dropping off a resume that would be thrown away as soon as she turned her back. "Do you think I have a chance?" she finally asked, her voice betraying a contradictory mixture of hope and fear, the terror of another rejection battling against the desperate need to believe that something might finally work out. Rosa squeezed her hands harder, her determination visible in every feature of her face. "Of course you do. Lucia said they'll need someone reliable and hard-working, and no one is more dedicated than you. We'll prepare everything tonight. I'll help you choose the right outfit, practice possible answers. My mum has already agreed to stay with Matteo all day tomorrow if needed," she replied, her confidence slowly beginning to penetrate the armor of discouragement Camilla had built after weeks of closed doors. That night, after Rosa left and Matteo fell asleep, Camilla stayed awake meticulously preparing for the next day's interview. She washed and ironed her only formal outfit, a black skirt and a white blouse she had worn to church events before Javier's death. She brushed and pinned up her hair, trying to imagine a hairstyle that looked professional. She rehearsed answers to possible questions, repeating phrases about responsibility, punctuality, and dedication to the bathroom mirror. For the first time in weeks, a small flame of hope ignited in her chest. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to break the cycle of despair that threatened to engulf her. Tomorrow she would enter that luxury hotel with her head held high, determined to win the job that could mean survival for her little family. For Matteo, for herself, for that chance at a fresh start, she would give it her best. The interior of the Imperial Hotel was dazzling. Polished marble floors reflected the glow of enormous crystal chandeliers, elegant furniture occupied the spacious lobby, and impeccably uniformed staff moved with choreographed precision. Camilla felt immediately out of place in that environment, her simple skirt and blouse ensemble looking even more modest against the opulence around her. A receptionist with a rehearsed smile led her through endless corridors to a small meeting room, where she was instructed to wait. Camilla sat on the edge of the leather chair, her restless hands smoothing the wrinkles of her skirt repeatedly, her heart pounding against her ribs as she tried to recall the answers she had prepared the night before. "Mrs. Alvarez?" "I'm Richard Thompson, General Manager of the Imperial Hotel." The deep voice interrupted her thoughts. A tall, middle-aged man entered the room, followed by an elegant woman whose impeccable tailored suit and rigid posture exuded authority. "And this is Veronica Hastings, our services supervisor and my trusted assistant." Richard sat across from Camilla, while Veronica remained standing, her cold eyes analyzing Camilla from head to toe with a gaze that made no attempt to hide her disapproval. The contrast between the two was evident. Richard seemed tired but cordial, while Veronica radiated barely concealed hostility, her thin lips compressed into a permanent line of displeasure. "So, you have no prior experience in hospitality?" Richard questioned after briefly examining Camilla's resume. She straightened in her chair, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the nervousness that made her hands tremble slightly. "Not in hotels, sir, but I learn quickly and I'm extremely organized. I worked as a housekeeper in a large home for 2 years before getting married, and I know how to clean and organize to the highest standards," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. She was about to continue when Veronica cut her off with a barely disguised sound of disdain. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, we need experienced professionals. Our guests pay for excellence, not trial and error from unqualified people," she said, her voice cutting like ice, eyes fixed not on Camilla, but on the manager. "I can observe," Veronica went on, finally addressing Camilla directly with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, "that people like you usually have issues with punctuality and commitment. This hotel caters to an exclusive clientele with valuable items in their rooms. We need reliable employees." The emphasis on the last word was laden with insinuations, like a veiled accusation that struck Camilla like a slap in the face. The prejudice was evident, not only in the words chosen, but in the way Veronica looked at her, as if Camilla was some undesirable thing that had infiltrated her pristine environment. "I have a reference from the family I worked for," Camilla managed to say, her voice slightly trembling as she took a carefully folded letter from her bag. "And as for punctuality, I have never been late a single day in my previous jobs. As for reliability," she paused, taking a deep breath to contain her emotion, "I'm raising my son alone after recently losing my husband. He depends completely on me. There is no greater motivation to be reliable and dedicated than knowing my son's future is at stake." The sincerity in her voice was palpable, creating a moment of silence in the room that Veronica quickly tried to dispel. "Mr. Thompson, we have at least 5 candidates with proven hotel experience waiting for an interview," Veronica insisted, completely ignoring Camilla's speech as if she wasn't present. Richard was looking pensively at the resume in front of him, his face revealing an internal conflict. For a moment, Camilla felt her heart sink, certain that this would be just another day of rejection, another door slammed in her face. The manager drummed his fingers on the desk for a few seconds, looking from Camilla to Veronica and back to the resume. "Mrs. Alvarez," he finally said, "the job is yours. 30-day probationary period, as is standard for all employees. You start Monday at 6 in the morning." The announcement fell like a bomb in the small room. Camilla had to hold herself back from letting out the sigh of relief that formed in her chest, while Veronica's face transformed into a mask of disbelief and barely contained outrage. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, I think you should reconsider," she began, but was interrupted by a firm gesture from the manager. "My decision is made, Veronica. Mrs. Alvarez seems determined, and I have a good feeling about her," he declared, closing the matter. In Veronica's eyes, however, Camilla saw something that made her moment of triumph freeze, a cold, calculated hatred that silently promised that this battle was only just beginning. Camilla walked out of the Imperial Hotel with light steps, almost floating over the sidewalk pavement. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, the air more breathable, as if the entire universe had suddenly become less hostile. A job, a steady salary, the possibility of paying bills, buying nutritious food for Mateo, maybe even saving a little for emergencies. The feeling of relief was so intense she could barely contain the tears that threatened to escape. After weeks of closed doors, finally a window had opened. Not just a window, but an imposing door at one of the most prestigious hotels in the city. No matter how exhausting the work might be, it represented a chance to rebuild the life that had been shattered by Javier's death. "I did it, Javier," she whispered to the sky, imagining that somehow her husband could hear her. "I'll take care of our son. I'll give him everything we dreamed of together." The image of Mateo's little face lit up her mind. How happy he would be when he found out they could buy cereal again, that maybe they could even visit that ice cream parlor he loved so much on the next paycheck. For the first time since the funeral, Camilla felt something beyond despair and exhaustion. She felt hope, fragile but present, like a small sprout emerging after a harsh winter. What Camilla couldn't see, however, was the scene unfolding inside the hotel at the exact moment she was walking away. In the hallway near the meeting room, Veronica Hastings watched through the window as Camilla's silhouette disappeared into the distance, her elegant fingers drumming against the glass in an irritated rhythm. Her thin lips were compressed into a line of indignation, and her eyes, usually calculating and cold, now burned with a visceral resentment. "Don't worry, dear, it won't last long," she muttered to Ashley Miller, another hotel employee who now stopped beside her. "Richard may have his moments of charity, but we know what to do with these people." Ashley nodded, her pretty face marred by the same arrogance that characterized Veronica, a new maid without experience. "I can already imagine the accidents that will happen, the objects that will mysteriously disappear from the rooms she cleans," she responded in a low voice, a malicious smile playing on her lips. Veronica smiled, a chilling smile that never reached her eyes. "Exactly. Richard will still thank me for proving he was right from the start. People like her don't belong at the Imperial." Her gaze followed Camilla's distant figure one last time before turning around, adjusting her impeccable suit with a precise gesture. "Let's see how long our new maid lasts before being kicked out of here, with accusations that will ensure no other hotel ever hires her." As Camilla walked home, dreaming of the brighter future that finally seemed possible, She had no idea that she had just entered an arena where her integrity, her dignity, and her livelihood would be tested beyond any limit she could imagine. Camilla's first week at the Imperial Hotel was a roller coaster of learning and physical exhaustion. Every day she woke up at 4:30 in the morning, prepared Matteo's breakfast and the lunch he would take to Rosa's mother's house, and embarked on the first bus to arrive promptly at 6. The work was arduous. 16 rooms to clean daily, each with stringent cleanliness standards that required meticulous attention to every detail. Fire Egyptian cotton sheets had to be stretched without a single wrinkle, marble bathrooms polished until they shone like mirrors, every guest's object carefully respected and kept exactly in the position it had been left. Her knees ached from so much scrubbing floors, her fingers burned from chemical products, and her back protested after hours bent over king-size beds. "You're taking too long in each room, Alvarez," criticized Veronica during a surprise inspection, running her finger across a shelf and examining it with disdain, even without finding a single speck of dust. "The other maids do it in half the time." Camilla merely nodded, without arguing that the others had years of experience and that she was still learning. Instead, she started waking up even earlier to study the hotel's procedures manual, memorizing every instruction, every required standard. During her breaks, she discreetly observed the techniques of the more experienced maids, adapting their methods to gain efficiency without sacrificing quality. In the third week, her persistence began to pay off. Her movements became more assured, more fluid, developing an efficient choreography for each type of room. "Good job on 412, commented one of the floor supervisors, an older woman who rarely praised anyone. The guest left a specific note commending the cleanliness. Small victories like that fueled Camilla's determination. The first paycheck allowed her to buy decent food again, pay part of the overdue rent, and even a small toy for Matteo, who bravely endured the long hours away from his mother without complaint. Seeing her son smile when receiving the simple gift, a fire truck he had been longing for months, made every moment of exhaustion worth it. "Did you notice how everyone's talking about the amazing new maid?" Veronica commented to Ashley in the staff lounge, her voice dripping with venom as she watched Camilla from afar, chatting amiably with other maids during the break. "Richard stopped by my room this morning just to mention how he was impressed with her progress." Ashley rolled her eyes, adjusting the golden badge that identified her as an assistant supervisor, a position she had obtained thanks to Veronica's influence, not her own merit. "It's ridiculous. She acts like she's special just because she can clean a bathroom," she responded, her gaze fixed on Camilla with a dislike that grew with every compliment the newcomer received. Camilla's growing popularity among colleagues and guests was like a constant thorn in Veronica's side. The maid not only did her job with excellence, but also displayed a genuine kindness that naturally attracted sympathy. She helped colleagues who fell behind on their tasks, memorized regular guests' preferences, and maintained a humility that contrasted sharply with Veronica's arrogance and her circles. For the manager's assistant, every smile from Camilla, every thank you she received, seemed a personal challenge to the natural order of things, an order in which people like Camilla should remain invisible and submissive. "This can't go on," Veronica declared to Ashley during a lunch away from the hotel, away from curious ears. "She's been here for a short time and has already received 3 positive mentions from guests. Thompson is practically drooling over how she represents the hotel's values." Her fingers drummed irritably on the table as a plan began to form in her calculating mind. "We need to show everyone who she really is." Ashley leaned forward, intrigued by the intensity in her friend's gaze. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. The smile that formed on Veronica's lips was as cold as winter. "Our guests are very wealthy people, Ashley. Wealthy people with valuable objects in their rooms, jewelry, money, expensive electronics. It would be a shame if some of those items started mysteriously disappearing, don't you think? Say especially from the rooms assigned to our exemplary employee." Ashley's eyes widened, understanding immediately. "You want to frame Camilla for theft? That's brilliant and dangerous at the same time." Veronica shrugged, taking a sip of her expensive wine as if they were discussing nothing more serious than the day's menu. "Thompson trusts me blindly. If I tell him I suspected her from the start, that he should have listened to me, he'll believe it without questioning." The plan was sealed with flutes of champagne, toasting what they called the restoration of the natural order. The following week, an expensive watch would disappear from room 512, followed by a wallet in 38 and a pair of diamond earrings in 7-1, all rooms cleaned by Camilla, all belonging to carefully selected influential guests with a propensity for formal complaints. The trap was set, the wolves positioned, and Camilla, completely oblivious, continued working with the same dedication as always, grateful for the opportunity she believed was the beginning of a new life, unaware that her colleagues were plotting her destruction with meticulous precision. The first complaint arrived on a Tuesday morning, when an executive from a multinational company descended to the lobby visibly upset, demanding to speak to the manager immediately. His gold watch, a piece valued at thousands of dollars, had vanished from his suite. Richard Thompson was urgently summoned to handle the situation, offering profuse apologies, as the man threatened not only to sue the hotel, but also to call the police right away. "That watch was a gift for my company's 20th anniversary. Its sentimental value is priceless," the guest shouted, attracting curious glances from other patrons in the lobby. Thompson managed to calm him down temporarily, promising a thorough investigation and compensation for the lost item. 3 days later, a socialite staying in the penthouse burst into the reception in tears, claiming her diamond earrings had mysteriously disappeared from her jewelry box. "They had been in my family for generations. How dare you allow thieves to work in this so-called luxury establishment?" she screamed, her normally composed Botoxed face now contorted into an expression of genuine fury. The incident attracted even more attention, with other guests uncomfortably watching the scene, some beginning to check their own valuables, creating a wave of paranoia that spread rapidly through the hotel's corridors. That same afternoon, 2 more complaints were registered: a wallet stuffed with high-denomination bills and a state-of-the-art tablet, all mysteriously missing. "This is absolutely unacceptable," thundered Richard in his office, slamming his fist on the desk while Veronica remained standing by his side, her face a mask of professional concern that perfectly concealed her inner satisfaction. 4 incidents in less than a week. The Imperial's reputation is at stake." Veronica nodded gravely, her calculating eyes assessing the manager's level of agitation before responding. "It's true, sir. I must observe that 3 of the missing items disappeared from rooms assigned to the same maid," she commented, her voice deliberately neutral, as if merely stating a curious fact, not planting a seed of suspicion. Richard called an emergency meeting with all hotel employees for the next morning, before the start of the shift. In the conference hall, the atmosphere was tense, with dozens of employees, from receptionists to maintenance staff, clustered in apprehensive silence. Camilla was among them, tired after another night of little sleep, worried about the tone of the urgent summons she had received. When Thompson entered the room, his normally affable face was hardened by anger and concern. Veronica followed him closely, accompanied by Ashley, both with expressions of rehearsed solemnity. "In recent days, we have received multiple complaints of valuable items missing from our guests' rooms," Richard began, his voice echoing in the oppressive silence of the room. "This is completely unacceptable and goes against everything the Imperial Hotel represents. We are talking about a violation of the trust our clients place in us. I want to make it absolutely clear that I will not tolerate theft within this institution. Whoever is behind these thefts will be identified, immediately fired, and handed over to the police authorities without any hesitation." His words fell heavy like stones upon the employees, creating a palpable sense of apprehension. "We have initiated a thorough internal investigation and are reviewing all access records to the affected rooms," he continued, his stern gaze sweeping across every face in the room. "If anyone has knowledge about these incidents or any relevant information, come forward now. This is the moment for voluntary confessions before the evidence speaks for itself." No one moved, no one spoke, only the tense silence of frightened people, some outraged at the suggestion that a colleague could be the culprit. Camilla felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine when, for a brief moment, Veronica's eyes met hers. There was something in that gaze, a cold satisfaction that clashed completely with the seriousness of the situation, but it vanished so quickly that Camilla wondered if she had imagined it. The luxurious restaurant outside the hotel offered the perfect setting for conspiracy, discreet, exclusive, with tables far enough apart to ensure that private conversations remained just that. Veronica absent-mindedly swirled her glass of exorbitantly expensive red wine, the ruby liquid spinning hypnotically as her calculating eyes assessed the situation. Ashley, seated across from her, seemed nervous, her fingers drumming restlessly on the immaculate white linen tablecloth. "The petty thefts worked perfectly," Veronica murmured, a cold smile of satisfaction playing on her perfectly painted lips. Thompson is panicking about the possibility of losing important clients, and the employees are all paranoid, suspecting each other. The stage is set. She leaned forward, lowering her voice even further, despite the assured privacy. But we need the final blow. Something big enough to ensure that woman is ousted not only from the Imperial, but from any decent hotel in this city. Ashley swallowed hard, taking a sip of her own wine to calm her nerves. The small sabotages had been one thing, but what Veronica was now suggesting was far more serious. Are you sure about this? If we get caught, we could be prosecuted. It's not just a dismissal we're risking, she warned, though she knew it would be useless to try to dissuade Veronica once she had set her sights on a target. The manager's assistant waved off the concern with an elegant flick of her perfectly manicured hand. We won't get caught. All we need is to choose the right guest and the perfect timing. Her smile widened as a plan crystallized in her Machiavellian mind. And I know exactly who it will be. Mr. Harrington is arriving tomorrow, that insufferable businessman who always complains about everything, demands constant attention and leaves miserable tips, despite his obscene fortune. Veronica remembered him well, a middle-aged man with an explosive temper and zero tolerance for anything less than perfection, the kind of person who would demand immediate and loud justice if he were to be the victim of a theft. He always brings that ridiculous antique jewelry case with solid gold cufflinks and other equally ostentatious masculine accessories, perfectly recognizable and valuable enough to be considered a serious theft. Veronica traced the rim of her glass with a perfectly manicured finger, each detail of the plan falling into place like pieces of a perverse puzzle. You know Camilla always carries that shabby bag to work, keeping it in the locker room during her shift. So easy to open, so convenient to plant evidence. The plan was meticulously simple in its cruelty. Ashley, as the assistant supervisor, would alter the room assignment schedule to ensure Camilla was responsible for Harrington's suite. Veronica would create a distraction to lure Camilla away from the locker room during her break. At that moment, Ashley would take one or two valuable pieces from Harrington's jewelry case and hide them in Camilla's bag. After that, it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment to suggest a locker search following the guest's inevitable furious complaint. Think of the look on her face when they find the jewelry in her bag, in front of everyone, Veronica whispered, her eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. All that talk about honesty and hard work crumbling in an instant. Thompson will have to admit I was right all along. People like her are not to be trusted. Ashley nodded slowly, her initial hesitation giving way to complicity as she envisioned the scene, Camilla humiliated, her own status at the hotel elevated as a reward for helping to unmask the thief, and Veronica finally avenged against the woman who had dared to earn respect and admiration despite her humble origins. The plan was laid, the trap ready to be set. Mr. Harrington arrived at the Imperial Hotel exactly as Veronica had predicted, demanding, irritable, and carrying his collection of masculine jewelry in the characteristic antique leather and metal case. As planned, Ashley discreetly altered the work schedule, ensuring the presidential suite where he would be staying was under Camilla's care. The trap began to be set with the precision of a Swiss watch, each cog moving in perfect synchronicity with the calculated malice of the two women. Veronica watched from afar as Camilla worked diligently, unaware of the fate her colleagues had plotted for her, each gentle smile from the maid only fueling her resentment. All chambermaids must attend the emergency training on the 3rd floor in 15 minutes, announced Veronica over the internal communication system, her professional voice revealing no trace of her true intentions. It was the agreed-upon signal with Ashley, the perfect moment to execute the plan, when Camilla would stow her purse in the locker room before heading upstairs for the supposed training. As the employees hurried toward their lockers, Veronica strategically positioned herself in the hallway, ensuring everyone made their way to the elevator, especially Camilla, who never missed work commitments. In the temporarily empty locker room, Ashley moved quickly, her heart racing with the adrenaline of the crime she was about to commit. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened Camilla's locker with the master key her position granted her access to. The battered bag was there just as expected. Ashley carefully unzipped it and deposited the solid gold cufflinks with emerald inlays she had discreetly stolen from Harrington's suite minutes earlier into the bottom of the bag. She covered the valuable item with a tissue and closed the bag, leaving everything exactly as she had found it. The crime had lasted less than 30 seconds. "Where are my gold cufflinks? They cost a fortune." Harrington's shrill voice echoed through the hotel lobby 2 hours later, his face flushed with rage as he gesticulated violently at Richard Thompson. "First, room service delays my breakfast, then I find hairs on my pillow, and now this? It's an outrage. I've been staying at the best hotels in the world for 30 years and have never been a victim of theft." His indignation drew curious looks from the other guests. Exactly the public, embarrassing and impossible to ignore scenario Veronica had anticipated. Richard Thompson tried to calm the furious guest, promising an immediate investigation, but Harrington would not be easily appeased. "Investigation? I want the police here now. I want every staff member who entered my room to be searched immediately. Those cufflinks were a gift from the President of Switzerland." The blatant lie about the jewelry's origin only accentuated the drama of the situation, exactly as Veronica had hoped. Thompson, cornered and fearing for the hotel's reputation, made the decision she was waiting for: a full search. "Attention all staff members," Thompson announced over the communication system, his voice betraying the tension of the moment. "Due to a serious incident, I request that all employees who worked on the 8th floor today report immediately to the conference room. There will be an inspection of personal belongings as part of our internal investigation." The message hit the staff like a bomb. Camilla, who was finishing up cleaning a room on the 6th floor, felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. She had never taken anything that wasn't hers in her life, but the seriousness of the announcement instantly made her nervous. In the conference room, the tension was palpable. 8 staff members, including Camilla, lined up uncomfortably in front of Thompson, Veronica, Ashley, and Harrington himself, who had insisted on being present. "Ladies and gentlemen, I deeply regret this situation," Thompson began, visibly embarrassed. "Mr. Harrington has reported the disappearance of valuable cufflinks from his suite, and we need to resolve this immediately. I request that you all open your lockers and bags for inspection." A murmur of indignation rippled through the group, but the alternative, refusing and looking guilty, was unthinkable. One by one, the staff members had their belongings examined, with Veronica strategically suggesting that Camilla be the last. When it was finally her turn, Camilla opened her bag with the confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. The silence in the room was deafening as Veronica, with an award-worthy theatricality, methodically searched through the contents. Her face lit up with false surprise when her fingers touched something metallic, hidden under a tissue. "What do we have here?" she asked, lifting the cufflinks for everyone to see. Time seemed to freeze as Camilla stared, horrified, at the jewels she had never seen before. The shock paralyzed Camilla as the gold cufflinks glinted accusingly in Veronica's hand. Her brain struggled to comprehend the image before her. It was impossible, simply impossible for that object to be in her bag. All eyes in the room turned to her, loaded with judgment, contempt, and disappointment. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the environment, replaced by a dense, suffocating tension that pressed on her chest like a concrete slab. This wasn't me. I've never seen this before in my life," she finally exclaimed, her voice strangled by the panic that was beginning to take over her body. The words came out choked, trembling, exactly as they would expect from someone caught red-handed, not a wronged innocent. "Someone put this in my bag. I would never steal anything, let alone from a guest." Her desperate denial echoed in the silent room, meeting only skeptical expressions and averted glances from the few colleagues who had previously treated her with respect. "My cufflinks, I knew it," Harrington shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Camilla. "It's always like that with you people, isn't it? Pretend to be honest and hard-working, but at the first opportunity, thieves." The venom in his words was only slightly more toxic than the almost imperceptible smile that danced at the corners of Veronica's mouth, quickly replaced by an expression of professional disappointment as she handed the jewels to Thompson. "Mrs. Alvarez, how do you explain this?" the manager questioned, his previously friendly tone now hardened by disappointment and anger. His eyes, which had seen potential in her just weeks before, now saw her only as a criminal, a stain on the immaculate reputation he worked so hard to maintain at the Imperial Hotel. Camilla felt the ground disappear from under her feet, the injustice of the situation so overwhelming that she could barely breathe. "Mr. Thompson, I swear on my son's life that I didn't take this. I've never seen these cufflinks before. Someone must have put them in my bag," Camilla pleaded, hot tears beginning to stream down her face. She looked desperately at her colleagues for support, finding only uncomfortable expressions and averted glances. "Please, you know me. I've worked hard every day, never touched anything that wasn't mine. This is a setup." Her voice broke on the last word, the terrible reality beginning to sink in. No one believed her. "A setup? How convenient!" Veronica intervened, her voice dripping with false indignation. "I must remind you, Mr. Thompson, that I expressed concerns from the outset about hiring someone without proper references. The thefts began precisely when she arrived." Ashley nodded vigorously beside her boss, adding her own silent condemnation to the sentence being formed against Camilla. It was her word against that of two respected employees, and the outcome was predetermined, like a medieval trial. "That's absurd. I'm being framed. Please, Mr. Thompson, investigate properly. Check the security cameras, look for fingerprints on the jewelry," begged Camilla, clinging to any hope of proving her innocence. But the manager's stony face already indicated that his verdict was formed, solidified by the concrete evidence found in her bag and the history of thefts that had coincidentally begun with her arrival. "Enough lies, Mrs. Alvarez. The evidence is irrefutable," declared Thompson, his icy tone cutting the air like a blade. "You are officially dismissed from the Imperial Hotel, and we are obliged to file a formal complaint with the police for theft." The words fell like stones upon Camilla, each one burying deeper the life she had tried so hard to rebuild. "Security. Escort Mrs. Alvarez to collect her belongings and then out of the hotel. She will no longer be allowed entry into these premises." The security guard, a man who just days before had smiled kindly at her in the hallway, now approached with a hardened expression, as if she were a dangerous criminal. The humiliation was absolute, public, devastating. Camilla felt the stares of her colleagues piercing her back as she was led out of the room, some with silent pity, others with barely concealed contempt, all convinced of her guilt. In the lobby, guests murmured and pointed, the news of the thieving maid already spreading like wildfire. "Please, you are making a terrible mistake. I have a small child to support. This job is all I have." Camilla cried out in one last desperate effort, her tears now flowing freely as she was practically dragged out of the hotel. Her pleas fell on deaf ears and hardened hearts, judged too swiftly. On Veronica's face, watching the scene from afar, a cruel smile of satisfaction was finally allowed to appear fully, revenge consummated against the woman who had dared to earn respect and admiration that, in her warped mind, she did not deserve. Minutes later, the intermittent glare of blue and red police lights reflected on Camilla's tear-stained face, creating a grotesque spectacle for the curious onlookers gathered on the sidewalk in front of the luxurious Imperial Hotel. Two uniformed officers advanced towards her, with stern expressions as she still tried to articulate her innocence, her voice hoarse from so much pleading for a chance to defend herself. The maid's uniform she had worn with such pride now seemed a badge of shame, her hands trembling uncontrollably as the policeman approached with metallic handcuffs that glinted menacingly in the afternoon sun. "Mrs. Alvarez, you are being arrested on charges of aggravated theft," announced the older officer, his monotone voice indicating it was just another routine day for him, another criminal being taken off the streets. For Camilla, it was the end of the world. The handcuffs closed painfully around her wrists as her mind spun in despair. Mateo, her little Mateo, what would happen to him now? Who would explain to a child that his mother had been taken away by the police, accused of a crime she did not commit? The weight of this reality was more crushing than the cold metal on her wrists. "You are making a terrible mistake. I am innocent. I have a little son waiting for me," Camilla cried out as she was led to the patrol car, her voice breaking into desperate sobs that no one seemed to hear. Passers-by watched with that morbid mix of curiosity and secret glee that others' misfortunes often provoke, some taking pictures with their cell phones, others shaking their heads in feigned dismay. Richard Thompson watched from the hotel entrance, his face a mask of professional disappointment, convinced he had been deceived by the woman he had dared to trust. From a second-floor window, partially hidden by heavy curtains, Veronica and Ashley observed the scene with concealed smiles, discreetly toasting with coffee cups that hid their indecent celebration. "Mission accomplished," Veronica whispered, her satisfaction palpable as she watched Camilla being placed in the back of the police car. "I always said people like her don't belong at the Imperial." Ashley nodded, though a momentary flicker of guilt crossed her gaze, quickly suppressed by the intoxicating feeling of victory and the implicit promise of advancement in the hotel's hierarchy. The patrol car door slammed shut with a definitive thud, sealing Camilla into her new waking nightmare. As the vehicle drove away, taking her from everything she had worked so hard to build, a single thought pounded in her tormented mind. How would her son survive now that she, his only protector, had been torn away from him by an injustice as cruel as it was calculated? The phone rang shrill in Rosa's small living room, interrupting the story she was reading to Matteo. The boy was in her care as on every workday of Camilla's, but it was already past 9 o'clock in the evening, and his mother still hadn't shown up to pick him up, something completely out of the ordinary for someone so responsible. Rosa felt a tightness in her chest as she got up to answer, an inexplicable feeling that something terrible had happened. Her intuition was correct. The mechanical voice on the other end was an automated system from the local police station, informing that Camila Alvarez was in custody and had the right to one phone call. The shock was so great that Rosa had to lean against the wall to keep from falling as the system transferred the call. "Rose? Rose, is that you?" Camilla's voice came out broken by desperate sobs. "They accused me of theft at the hotel. I'm arrested, Rose. They put jewels in my bag. They framed me." The words came out rushed, almost incomprehensible amid the crying. Rose closed her eyes tightly, trying to process the horror of the situation, while Matteo watched her curiously from the couch, thankfully far enough away not to hear the conversation. "Matteo is with me. He's safe. I'll take care of him. I'll come to you. Better for you to explain to me what happened slowly," she asked, trying to remain calm for both of them, although her own heart was beating arrhythmically. 3 days later, Rosa held Matteo's hand firmly as they walked down the cold grey corridor of the women's detention center. The confused and frightened boy clung to the small, colorful drawing he had made for his mother, his wide eyes taking in the metal doors, bars, and uniformed guards. Rosa had tried to explain the situation as gently as possible, saying his mother was helping the police solve a problem, but the child was too intelligent to fully accept that story. "Auntie Rosa, why is my mom in this ugly place? Did she do something wrong?" he asked, his small voice echoing down the oppressive hallway. "No, dear, your mom didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults make mistakes about other people, and that's what happened. We're here to show that we love her and know she's a good person," Rosa replied, swallowing the lump in her throat as she tried to preserve the boy's innocence. How could she explain the concept of injustice to a child, of cruel people who destroy other lives out of pure malice? How could she make him understand that sometimes the world punished the innocent and let the guilty continue to cause pain? These were harsh truths for such a small heart, already scarred by the loss of his father. When Camilla appeared in the visitor's room, Rosa had to suppress a gasp of shock. Only 3 days had passed, but her friend looked like she had aged years. Her face was pale and haggard. Deep circles marked her swollen, tear-stained eyes, and the orange prison uniform hung loosely on her body, evidence of rapid weight loss. Upon seeing Matteo, however, her eyes momentarily lit up with that unconditional love that not even the most terrible injustice could erase. She knelt down, opening her arms, and the boy ran to her, throwing himself into her hungry embrace. "My love, my treasure, how are you?" Camilla asked, peppering her son's face with kisses, holding him as if afraid he might disappear at any moment. Matteo handed her the carefully folded drawing, a colorful, childlike depiction of mother and son, holding hands under a smiling sun. "I made it for you, Mommy, so you don't get sad in this place," he explained, his innocence like a knife in Camilla's shattered heart. She held the drawing against her chest, as if it were the most precious of treasures, unable to contain the silent tears streaming down her face. While Matteo was distracted with a coloring book Rosa wisely brought, the two women were able to speak in hushed tones about the situation. "Camilla, try to remember exactly what happened. Who had access to your purse? Who could have done this?" Rosa asked, her keen eyes searching for any details that might help her friend. Camilla rubbed her tired face, trying to organize her thoughts. "There was an emergency drill called by Veronica that day. I left my purse in the locker room. It was the only time I was separated from it." Her voice faltered as she mentioned the manager's assistant's name, a sudden understanding dawning in her exhausted gaze. "Veronica has always looked at me with disdain since the interview. She told the manager that people like me couldn't be trusted," Camilla continued, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place in her mind. Rosa narrowed her eyes, indignation growing in her chest. "That arrogant woman. Her and that sycophantic assistant are behind this, I'm sure of it. We need to prove it, Camilla. I won't let you rot in here for a crime you didn't commit," she declared, fierce determination replacing her initial despair. The seed of resistance was planted, but the path to justice would be long and arduous. The days dragged on inside the small, stifling cell, each minute an eternity of anguish for Camilla. The grey walls seemed to close in a little more every night as she huddled on the thin, hard mattress, clutching Matteo's drawing as her only comfort amidst the nightmare her reality had become. The constant noise, metal doors clanging, raised voices, muffled sobs from other inmates, created a macabre symphony that prevented any true rest. Her thoughts, however, were fixed in one direction: her son. How was he sleeping without her lullaby? Who would check if he'd brushed his teeth properly? Who would console him when he woke up calling for the father whose nightmares still haunted him? Rosa and Mateo's weekly visits were the only beacon in the oppressive darkness of the prison, the only time Camilla could breathe without feeling the crushing weight of injustice on her chest. But these brief encounters also brought a particular pain, seeing her son growing up without her, noticing small changes with each visit, new words he had learned, a different haircut, stories of everyday moments she should have shared with him. "When are you coming home, Mommy?" Mateo would invariably ask at the end of each visit, his large eyes carrying a hope that tore at Camilla's heart. She had no answer, only empty promises of soon, while the possibility of years of separation loomed over her head like an axe about to fall. "Mommy, please, I don't want to leave," Mateo cried at the last visit, clinging to Camilla's orange uniform with surprising strength for such a small child. The impassive guards signaled the end of their time, indifferent to the drama unfolding before them. Just another common scene in a place where families were torn apart daily. Tearing her son from her arms was like losing a piece of her soul. The echo of his sobs followed Camilla back to her cell, tormenting her through sleepless nights, where she wondered if she would ever be able to make up for the lost time, if she would ever again be a constant presence in her son's life, and not just a weekly visit limited by cruel, arbitrary rules beyond her control. At Rosa's house, Mateo also suffered in his silent and childlike way. Although Camilla's friends strived to provide affection and stability, nothing could replace a mother's presence. The boy had developed new habits. He kept pieces of food in his pockets, for when Mommy comes back, slept clinging to the blouse that still retained Camilla's scent, and obsessively drew scenes of his reunited family, always with a large smiling sun above, as if the celestial body could melt the bars separating them. At night, Rosa often found him sitting by the window, staring at the deserted street as if expecting to see his mother walking back home. "When they arrest the bad people who hurt my mum, will she be able to come back?" he asked one night, surprising Rosa with his keen perception of injustice. The question hung in the air, impossible to answer honestly without crushing the child's fragile hope. Meanwhile, in a cold and distant cell, Camilla counted the bricks of the wall for the 1,000th time, trying not to succumb to the despair that threatened to consume her. Her greatest fear was not the prison itself, but the terrible possibility that Mateo would grow up without her, that the years would rob her son's childhood while she remained imprisoned for a crime she did not commit, that the system that had already victimized her once would continue to steal what was most precious to her, the right to be a mother. In Rosa's small and cozy kitchen, the silence of the night was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and the occasional sound of Mateo turning on the makeshift bed in the living room. Camilla's friend sat at the table, surrounded by scribbled notes, fragments of information, desperate attempts to construct a timeline of the events that had led to her unjust imprisonment. An untouched cup of coffee cooled beside her as she nibbled on the tip of her pencil, frustration evident in every tense line of her exhausted face. How to prove that Camilla was innocent when all material evidence pointed to her guilt? How to unmask such a meticulously planned setup without resources, without legal knowledge, without access to evidence or witnesses? "I promised I'd bring you back, Camilla," Rosa whispered to the portrait of her friend that she kept on the table, a happy photo from before the tragedy, showing Camilla, Javier and Mateo on a picnic in the park. "I promised your son that his mother would come home, but how do I keep that promise?" The question hung in the air unanswered, heavy as lead. Every path she considered seemed to end in a dead end. A lawyer was out of the question. The few who took pro bono cases had endless waiting lists, and anyone even remotely competent would charge fees far beyond what they could ever dream of paying. Rosa stood up abruptly, the chair scraping on the floor with a noise that expressed her sudden determination. If there were no conventional paths, she would create her own path. If the system did not offer justice, she would seek it with her own hands. Walking silently into the living room, she watched Mateo sleeping, his small eyebrows furrowed even in slumber, as if even in his dreams he faced concerns too big for his age. The sight of that innocent child, deprived of his mother by calculated cruelty, ignited in Rosa a flame of indignation that overcame any fear or hesitation. "I'll bring your mother back to you," she promised in a whisper, adjusting the blanket over the sleeping boy. "Even if I have to face that entire hotel alone." The decision was made. Tomorrow she would wear her best outfit and take Matteo with her. She would go straight to confront the man who had the power to initiate the reversal of that injustice. Richard Thompson, the manager who had hired Camilla and then condemned her based on planted evidence. If she could make him doubt, if she could plant the seed of suspicion about Veronica and her accomplice, perhaps there would be a chance. Back in the kitchen, Rosa took a clean sheet of paper and began to write frenetically, planning every word she would say, every argument she would use, preparing for the confrontation like a general planning a decisive battle. The fight would be unequal. A simple medical clinic receptionist against the powerful manager of a luxury hotel, backed by his trusted team and the apparent solidity of the evidence against Camilla. But Rosa had something they didn't, the absolute certainty of her friend's innocence and the protective ferocity of someone fighting not only for justice, but for a shattered family. Get ready, Richard Thompson, Veronica Hastings, and whoever else is involved in this setup, Rosa murmured, determination burning in her eyes as she traced the lines of her improvised plan. You may have all the power and influence, but you underestimated what a loyal friend is capable of. The following morning would mark the beginning of the battle for Camilla's freedom, a battle Rosa was willing to fight to the end, even without knowing exactly how to win it. With Matteo sleeping peacefully in the living room next door, she worked through the night, arming herself with the only tool she had at her disposal, the truth. The next day, the Imperial Hotel rose imposingly under the clear morning sky, its glass and marble facades reflecting the sun like a monument to wealth and exclusivity. To Rosa, who firmly held Matteo's hand as they approached the main entrance, the building looked less like a luxury establishment and more like a fortress to be conquered. Wearing her only formal outfit, a simple suit she kept for special occasions, and with her hair carefully combed, she had made an effort to appear respectable, worthy of attention. Matteo by her side wore his best clothes, his small face washed and hair combed, holding against his chest the latest drawing he had made for his mother. Remember what we talked about, Matteo, Rosa murmured, adjusting the boy's collar. We're going to talk to your mother's boss and show that she's good, that she would never take anything from anyone. The child nodded solemnly, his big eyes revealing an understanding beyond his years. Losing his father and now having his mother ripped from his life had forced him into an early maturity that broke Rosa's heart. Together, they crossed the revolving doors, immediately feeling out of place in the opulent environment of the lobby, where impeccably uniformed staff attended to elegantly dressed guests. Good morning. I would like to speak with Mr. Richard Thompson, please. It's an urgent matter, announced Rosa to the receptionist, keeping her voice steady, despite the nervousness that made her heart race. The woman behind the counter cast an evaluating look at the unlikely pair, clearly deciding whether they deserved the general manager's attention. Mr. Thompson is very busy today. If you can tell me what this is about, perhaps I can direct you to someone who can help, she responded with rehearsed politeness that barely disguised the implicit rejection. It's about Camilla Alvarez, the chambermaid unjustly accused of theft. We'll stay here as long as necessary until he receives us, Rosa declared, her determination outweighing her fear. Upon hearing his mother's name, Matteo squeezed Rosa's hand tighter, his eyes scanning the lobby as if expecting to see Camilla emerge from a corridor at any moment. The mention of the case clearly unsettled the receptionist, whose eyes widened slightly before forcing a tense smile. Wait a moment, please. After 20 minutes of waiting in leather armchairs that seemed to swallow them, a middle-aged man with a tired expression approached. I'm Richard Thompson. I understand you want to talk about Mrs. Alvarez, he said, his tone formal but not entirely hostile. Rosa stood up immediately, holding Matteo by the shoulders. Mr. Thompson, my name is Rosa Morales. I'm a friend of Camilla's and have been taking care of her son Matteo since she was unjustly imprisoned. We've come to beg you to reconsider the case, to investigate more deeply. Camilla is innocent. She was the victim of a setup. The manager sighed, discomfort evident on his face. Mrs. Morales, I understand your loyalty to your friend, but the evidence was conclusive. The cufflinks were found in her bag, and the thefts coincided exactly with her arrival at the hotel. I'm truly sorry about the boy's situation, but the hotel needs to protect its guests and its reputation. His gaze fell on Matteo, softening momentarily as he noticed the boy's eyes filling with tears. Please, sir, I want my mom back, said Matteo, his small voice trembling with pent-up emotion. She never takes things that aren't hers. She always teaches me to return even pencils I borrow at school. The child's simple and sincere words created an uncomfortable moment of silence. Thompson swallowed hard, visibly affected by the innocent appeal, while Rosa added, "Did the thefts continue after Camilla's arrest? Did you check that, Mr. Thompson? Or are we so eager to find culprits that we don't care about the truth?" The question hung in the air, planting the first seed of doubt in the manager's heart. His gaze lingered for a moment on the drawing Matteo held, a childlike illustration of a woman behind bars. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave now. I've devoted enough time to this matter," Thompson declared, recomposing his professional demeanor after the brief moment of hesitation. His tone had hardened again, the brief vulnerability caused by Matteo's appeal now hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic formality. "The decisions made by the hotel were based on concrete evidence. There's nothing I can do to reverse the course of justice." He adjusted his tie, as if the gesture could reaffirm his authority, discreetly signaling a security guard who was watching the scene from afar. Rosa felt her blood boil in her veins, indignation battling despair in her chest. Justice? What kind of justice is it that condemns an innocent mother without a proper investigation? That separates a child from the only family she has left? Her voice trembled, not with fear but with contained anger. Matteo, sensing the growing tension, clung to Rosa's legs, the drawing he had brought now crumpled in his small hand. "Please, I just want my mum," he pleaded, tears finally spilling from his dark eyes so much like Camilla's. "Security, please escort these people out," Thompson instructed, averting his gaze from the child's devastated face as if the sight was too much to bear. "Do not return to these premises. There will be no further discussions on this matter." His words sounded rehearsed, almost mechanical, as he turned to quickly retreat to the sanctuary of his office, away from the accusations and childlike sobs that echoed uncomfortably in his ears. Alone in his office, Thompson let himself sink heavily into his executive chair, a deep furrow marking his brow as he mentally replayed the scene in the lobby. The absolute certainty he had felt on the day the cufflinks were discovered in Camilla's bag began to show small cracks, like fissures in an apparently solid concrete block. The child's face, devastated by the loss of his mother, disturbed him more than he cared to admit. "She never takes things that aren't hers." Matteo's small, sincere voice echoed in his mind, planting the first genuine seed of doubt. Almost without thinking, Thompson opened his computer and accessed the hotel's incident logging system. His eyes scanned the screen, pausing on an entry logged just 3 days earlier, a diamond brooch gone missing from the presidential suite. Another entry, dated a week after Camilla's arrest, a wallet with a significant amount of cash mysteriously vanished from a diplomat's room. And yet another, more recent, an expensive electronic device reported stolen by a frequent corporate guest. Thompson leaned back in his chair, the discomfort growing in his chest like an unavoidable wave. The thefts continued, even with Camila Alvarez locked behind bars. If she was the culprit, how could the new disappearances be explained? Was it possible he had misjudged the situation, blindly trusting the evidence presented by Veronica? The image of his trusted assistant surfaced in his mind, along with a flash of memory. Hadn't Veronica vehemently insisted against hiring Camilla from the start? Hadn't she been the one who first suggested that the maid's rooms be more rigorously inspected? What if, he murmured to himself, doubt finally taking concrete shape in his mind. His hands rested on the desk, fingers tapping restlessly as an idea began to form, a disturbing idea that would require courage to investigate. Night had fallen when Thompson remained in his office, long past his usual hours. The silent hotel around him contrasted with the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. The image of little Matteo pleading for his mother refused to leave him, as did the undeniable records of thefts that continued to occur, even with Camila Alvarez behind bars. After hours of restlessness, he made a decision. With decisive movements, he picked up his personal phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "William, it's Richard Thompson. I know it's late, but I need your expertise on a delicate matter." On the other end of the line, William Parker, manager of the prestigious Bellevue Hotel and a longtime friend, listened intently as Thompson recounted the recent events, his voice instinctively lowering, even though he was alone in the office. "I'm having increasing doubts about this employee's guilt, but the evidence against her seemed irrefutable. How can I be sure without causing an even bigger scandal?" William's deep laughter echoed through the phone. "Richard, do you remember that incident with the Russian pianist and the mysterious thefts at my hotel 5 years ago? I faced a similar dilemma." Thompson vaguely recalled the case, a famous musician accused of theft, later proven innocent, causing considerable embarrassment to the Bellevue. "I used what we call an honesty test, a trap for the real culprit. I placed a valuable, easily identifiable item in a specific room and installed a discrete camera, independent of the hotel's regular security system. The idea illuminated Thompson's mind like a lighthouse in the darkness. "A camera that only I would control without the security team's knowledge," he muttered, the possibilities unfolding rapidly. William agreed. "Exactly. If the thefts continue, the true culprit is still operating, feeling safe now that the scapegoat is in prison. People like that become confident, careless. It's your best chance to uncover the truth." After hanging up, Thompson contemplated the official portrait of the Imperial staff on his office wall, his eyes lingering on Veronica and Ashley, their professional smiles frozen in the photograph. An uncomfortable suspicion had lodged itself in his chest, impossible to ignore. Tomorrow he would discreetly acquire a high-definition camera and select the perfect item for the trap, something too valuable for the real thief to ignore, something that could finally reveal the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. For the first time since Camilla's imprisonment, Thompson felt the weight of the possibility of having made a terrible mistake and a growing determination to correct it at any cost. Wednesday morning found Richard Thompson on a mission he had never imagined undertaking as the Imperial Hotel's manager. Using the pretext of an external meeting, he first headed to a discreet electronics store in the mall, where he acquired a miniaturized high-definition camera with night vision and motion activation technology. The salesman, misinterpreting Thompson's needs, had discreetly offered even smaller models for matrimonial surveillance, a suggestion the manager rejected with discomfort. It wasn't a case of infidelity he sought to prove, but something potentially more serious: the innocence of a woman who might be unjustly imprisoned by his rash decision. With the camera carefully stowed in his executive portfolio, his next stop was a renowned jewelry store, whose proprietor knew him from hosting affluent guests at the Imperial. "I need something undisputedly valuable, but not excessively flashy," Thompson explained to the jeweler, who regarded him with professional curiosity. "An item that a person would immediately recognize as valuable, even without being an expert." After examining various options, he settled on an elegant diamond necklace, not ostentatiously large but with stones of exceptional purity mounted in platinum, its value easily estimable in the tens of thousands of dollars. The kind of jewelry no opportunistic thief could ignore. Back at the hotel, Thompson waited patiently for the perfect moment. He had meticulously chosen room 712 for his trap, a premium suite, luxurious enough to justify the presence of valuable jewelry, temporarily listed as under maintenance to ensure no guest would be checked in there for the next 48 hours. During the lunch break, when the 7th floor corridor would be momentarily empty, he strode to the room with firm steps that belied his growing internal tension. He used his master key card, quickly entering and closing the door behind him. Inside the suite, Thompson moved with the precision of someone executing a long-contemplated plan, although it had been conceived only the night before. First, he strategically positioned the camera, disguising it among the books on the small decorative bookshelf that offered a clear view of the main dresser. He tested the equipment using his cell phone, confirming that the angle perfectly captured the entire area where he would place the bait. Satisfied with the positioning, he carefully extracted the diamond necklace from its velvet box, arranging it on the bed in a deliberately casual manner, as if an absent-minded guest had temporarily forgotten her jewelry before leaving for dinner. "God forgive me if I'm wrong," Thompson murmured to the empty room, an involuntary prayer escaping his lips as he completed the final preparations. He adjusted the curtains to create the perfect balance of light and shadow, subtly highlighting the sparkle of the diamonds without making the staging obvious. With one last glance to confirm that everything appeared natural, he left the room, his heart beating strangely accelerated for someone who normally maintained unwavering professional composure. The rest of the day passed with torturous slowness for Thompson. He conducted meetings, signed documents, and interacted with important guests with his usual professionalism, but his mind remained fixed on the 7th floor, on the silent trap awaiting its denouement. At 6 o'clock, when most administrative staff ended their shifts, Thompson informed his secretary that he would need to review some confidential documents, ensuring that no one would find his prolonged presence at the hotel strange. With the office finally empty, he connected his personal tablet to the hidden camera, settling into his leather armchair for the vigil that could reveal disturbing truths about his own judgment. The screen showed the silent suite, the diamonds occasionally sparkling under the ambient light, like tiny stars trapped in metallic formation. For the first few hours, the only movement was the gradual lengthening of shadows as sunset approached, until the room's automatic lighting activated, creating an intimate ambience that only further accentuated the beauty of the exposed jewel. Thompson remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the screen, refusing even to blink for long periods, fearing he might miss the crucial moment. 9 o'clock, 10, 11, each passing minute seemed to confirm that his trap had failed, that perhaps he was chasing ghosts created by his own newly discovered guilt. The sparkle of the diamonds immediately caught Veronica's attention as she entered room 712. Her experienced eyes instantly assessed the value of the piece so carelessly left on the polished mahogany dresser. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face as she approached with the confidence of someone unafraid of being discovered. Her elegantly manicured fingers touched the jewel with the reverence of a connoisseur, appreciating the quality of the stones and the artisanal craftsmanship of the platinum that held them. "Ashley, come see what our distracted guest left for us," Veronica called in a hushed voice, her tone carrying barely contained excitement. Ashley, who had been standing guard near the door, checked the empty hallway one last time before silently closing the door behind her. Her heels sank into the plush carpet as she approached, eyes widening in recognition of the magnitude of the find. "My God, that must be worth a fortune. It's not just expensive costume jewelry, those are real diamonds," she exclaimed, her voice an enthusiastic whisper that the hidden camera captured with perfect clarity. "Another one for our collection," Veronica smiled, removing a silk handkerchief from her purse with which she carefully wrapped the necklace. "I almost feel bad for making it this easy. Our poor guests are getting more and more careless." The two women shared an accomplice laugh, savoring a moment of perverse triumph as the jewel safely disappeared into Veronica's bag. Richard Thompson, watching the scene unfold on his tablet, felt nausea forming in the pit of his stomach. His trusted employees, the very ones who occupied positions of responsibility in his hotel, were brazenly robbing the guests he had sworn to protect. "Let's celebrate tonight," Ashley proposed, nervously adjusting her hair. "This necklace alone is worth more than all those little trinkets we've picked up over the past few months." Veronica nodded, her smile now revealing a disdain Thompson had never noticed before. "Absolutely. Ever since we got rid of that meddling maid, it's been so much easier to operate. No one suspects us, we're practically untouchable now." Thompson's blood ran cold at the indirect mention of Camilla. The scene unfolding before his disbelieving eyes surpassed his worst suspicions. This was not just a case of opportunistic theft, it was a deliberate conspiracy that had resulted in an innocent woman's imprisonment. "You should have seen the look on her face when they found those cufflinks in her bag," Veronica continued, her laughter echoing with a cruelty that made Thompson shudder. All that talk about supporting her son, about being honest and hard-working, completely shattered in an instant. Ashley joined in the laughter, though a keen observer might have noticed a brief flicker of discomfort in her eyes before the mask of cruel amusement returned. "How you know I still think about that maid sometimes," Ashley confessed, fiddling nervously with the sleeve of her blazer as she eyed the diamond necklace. "Her little boy waiting at home. We started this just to frame her so you could prove you were right about her, but now—" Her voice trailed off, a rare moment of conscience disturbing her usually impassive expression. "Do you think we're going too far, Veronica? We got what we wanted. She's in jail. But we keep stealing more and more without any real need. It's almost become an addiction." Ashley touched the necklace with hesitant fingers. "This is the most valuable item we've ever taken. We started with just planting small things to get her framed, and now look at us." The look Veronica shot her accomplice was cold enough to freeze the air between them. "Don't be ridiculous. She got exactly what she deserved. People like her should know their place. Who does she think she is coming in here, earning everyone's sympathy with that sad story about her dead husband?" Thompson practically treated her like some kind of charity case. Veronica picked up the necklace, admiring how the light made the stones sparkle. "As for our little pastime, why stop now? We've discovered a natural talent, darling. These pampered rich don't even miss half of what they lose. Consider it a bonus for the years of hard work at this place, catering to these insufferable guests' ridiculous demands. Besides, if anyone does start to suspect, we can always find another maid to pin it on. It worked perfectly the first time, didn't it? Now stop worrying and focus on how we're going to spend our new treasure." "You're right. You were absolutely right about planting those cufflinks in her bag," Ashley agreed, quickly regaining her composure. "It was so easy. And now, with her out of the way, no one will ever suspect us. We're the model employees, after all." The two exchanged self-congratulatory smiles, completely oblivious to the camera documenting every incriminating word, every explicit confession of their conspiracy. Thompson watched, paralyzed, his pallid face reflecting the tablet's bluish glow. The weight of his own responsibility in the injustice committed against Camila Alvarez grew with every word exchanged between the two women. He had condemned a single mother to prison based on planted evidence, separating her from her son, destroying her reputation and future prospects, all because he had blindly trusted Veronica, accepted the convenient narrative without questioning the subtle biases that underpinned it. "I think we've lingered here long enough," Veronica declared, checking her likely ill-gotten expensive wristwatch. "We need to clock out of our shift as normal to avoid suspicion. We'll decide what to do with this later." She patted the bag where the diamond necklace now rested affectionately. "This one might be too big to try selling locally. I have a contact in another city who could help us out." The two women did one final sweep of the room, ensuring everything looked exactly as it had before, except, of course, for the absence of the valuable necklace. With the practiced efficiency of seasoned predators, they exited the suite, closing the door silently behind them. In the silence of his office, Thompson finally released the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, a single phrase escaping his trembling lips. "My God, what have I done?" Thompson remained motionless for several minutes, the tablet still firmly gripped in his trembling hands, the recording frozen on the last image of the two women leaving the room. The initial shock was beginning to give way to a cold and calculating anger, a feeling of betrayal so deep that it seemed to burn his chest from within. It was not only professional trust that had been violated, but his most fundamental principles, his belief in justice and human decency. For how long had those two been robbing their guests? How many lives had been harmed by their greed? And most devastating of all, how could he have been so blind as to condemn an innocent person based on the accusations of those snakes? With deliberately controlled movements, Thompson saved the recording in 3 different locations: on the tablet itself, on an emergency USB drive, and on the hotel's private cloud. He would not risk losing the only evidence that could free Camila Alvarez and punish the real criminals. Every second of the video was irrefutable proof, not only of the current theft, but also of the previous conspiracy that had resulted in an innocent woman's unjust imprisonment. The captured confessions were too explicit for any attempt at defense or denial. "Central Police Station? How can I help you?" a male voice answered, after Thompson dialed the police number. Not the emergency one, but the direct contact he maintained with the Property Crimes Department. "This is Richard Thompson, General Manager of the Imperial Hotel. I need to report a crime and correct a judicial error." His voice, normally firm and authoritative, trembled slightly as he pronounced the last words. The officer on the other end perceived the seriousness in the manager's voice, immediately transferring the call to a detective. Over the next 20 minutes, Thompson meticulously explained the situation to Detective Ramirez, the trap he had set, the evidence captured, the incriminating confessions, and most importantly, the injustice committed against Camila. "I have it all recorded, Detective. Every word, every confession about how they planted evidence to frame my former employee. I need you to come immediately, before they realize they've been discovered." The detective, recognizing the urgency of the situation, promised to send a team within 15 minutes, instructing Thompson not to confront the suspects and to keep the recording secure. While awaiting the police's arrival, Thompson took 2 crucial additional measures. First, using his access to the hotel's security system, he discreetly blocked Veronica and Ashley's key cards, ensuring they could not leave the building through employee-restricted accesses. Then he sent a text message to his personal lawyer: "Emergency at the Imperial. Employee wrongfully imprisoned. Need immediate legal assistance to free Camila Alvarez." The response was almost instantaneous. "On my way. Do not make official statements without my presence." Standing by the window of his office, Thompson gazed at the city's night sky, realizing that in the next few hours, his hotel would become the scene of a drama he could not have foreseen. Police cars would arrive discreetly, criminals would be arrested, statements would be taken, and somewhere in a cold, impersonal cell, Camila Alvarez still did not know that her release was about to begin. Just as her conviction had been swift and relentless, her redemption would be equally decisive. When the first flicker of police lights reflected off the Imperial's mirrored windows, Thompson felt the weight of responsibility and redemption hanging on the same scale. The blue and red lights of the police vehicles reflected off the Imperial Hotel's mirrored surfaces, creating a kaleidoscopic spectacle that drew curious glances from guests and passers-by. Inside the main lobby, the usual atmosphere of elegance and discretion had been abruptly replaced by a palpable tension as uniformed officers positioned themselves strategically at the exits. Detective Ramirez, a middle-aged man with piercing eyes and an impassive expression, conducted the operation with silent efficiency, maintaining as much discretion as possible in an inevitably eye-catching situation. "Mr. Thompson, we need you to identify the suspects without alerting them," Ramirez instructed in a low voice as they both observed the hotel's activity through the monitors in the security room. "We want to catch them with the evidence still in their possession." Thompson nodded gravely, his eyes scanning the various screens until he located Veronica in the executive restaurant, dining casually with Ashley as if it were just another normal evening after an honest day's work. The sight of the two women conversing animatedly, completely oblivious to the fate that awaited them, provoked in Thompson a contradictory mixture of satisfaction and nausea. "There they are," he indicated, pointing to the central monitor. "Veronica Hastings and Ashley Miller. The necklace is probably in Veronica's Prada bag. She never separates herself from that bag during work hours." Ramirez examined the women through the monitor, memorizing their faces and appearance, before making a discreet gesture to two plainclothes officers positioned near the restaurant entrance. The trap was set. All that was needed was the perfect moment to close it. In the hotel's main office, a technical team had already set up equipment to display the recording obtained by Thompson. The video, crystal clear in its accusatory sharpness, was ready to be presented as soon as the suspects were detained. Thompson's lawyer was also present, reviewing documents related to Camila Alvarez's case, preparing the process for her immediate release. "This is inadmissible," he muttered repeatedly as he read the original police reports. "A conviction based solely on circumstantial evidence, without proper investigation." The approach was executed with surgical precision. As Veronica and Ashley left the restaurant, heading towards the elevators, they were intercepted by 4 officers, 2 uniformed and 2 plainclothes. "Ladies, I need you to come with me without causing a disturbance," Ramirez declared, discreetly displaying his badge. "We have some questions about an incident at the hotel." Veronica's expression instantly transformed from surprise to calculated indignation, the mask of offended innocence she had perfected over years of manipulation. "There must be some mistake, Detective. I'm the executive assistant to Manager Thompson. Any questions related to the hotel should be directed through proper channels," she responded, her voice projecting the confidence of someone above suspicion. Ashley, less experienced in dissimulation, visibly paled, her eyes moving nervously between the officers and the nearest exits. "May I see what's in your bag, Mrs. Hastings?" Ramirez requested, his firm tone making it clear it was not really a request. "Absolutely not. That's an outrageous accusation," protested Veronica, clutching her purse against her chest as if her life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. Her mistake was trying to quickly walk away, a move that gave the officers justification to physically detain her. The ensuing scene was brief and humiliating, Veronica struggling furiously as the police officers restrained her and opened her bag, revealing not only the diamond necklace from the setup, but also 3 luxury watches, a gold bracelet, and various small pieces of jewelry that had been reported missing by guests over the past few weeks. "Veronica Hastings and Ashley Miller, you are being detained on suspicion of grand larceny and criminal conspiracy," announced Ramirez, as the officers handcuffed the 2 women. Ashley immediately crumpled, tears streaming down her face as she incoherently babbled about being manipulated. Veronica, on the other hand, maintained a facade of indignation, her gaze shooting invisible daggers at Thompson, who watched the scene from a safe distance. "This is a setup. Richard, you can't possibly believe I would do something like this," she shouted, her voice echoing through the now silent lobby. "I've worked faithfully for this hotel for years. Someone is framing me, just like they did that Maid." The irony of her words was not lost on anyone, especially as the 2 women were led to the main office, where the video footage awaited to shatter any pretense of innocence. Veronica's expression upon seeing herself on the high-definition screen, captured stealing the necklace and worse, gleefully confessing to framing Camilla, was an image Thompson knew he would never forget. All the color seemed to drain from her aristocratic face, her eyes wide with horror as she watched the meticulous destruction of her own defense, word by damning word, confession by confession. Beside her, Ashley had given up any pretense entirely, openly sobbing as she repeatedly mumbled, "It was her idea. She convinced me. I just wanted a promotion." "I think that settles any lingering doubt about their guilt," declared Ramirez, motioning for the officers to remove the prisoners. "And it raises serious questions about Mrs. Alvarez's case." Thompson stepped forward, his voice heavy with determination and remorse. "I will do everything in my power to correct this injustice, Detective. My lawyer is already working on the procedures for her immediate release." The county courthouse was packed on the morning of Camila Alvarez's retrial hearing. News of a potential sentence reversal had spread quickly, drawing local reporters, immigrant rights activists, and curious onlookers who had followed the case since its scandalous beginning. Camila, still wearing prison garb, looked simultaneously fragile and determined, her eyes anxiously scanning the crowd until they found Rosa and Mateo seated in the front row. The boy, dressed in his best clothes, clutched a freshly colored drawing, his gaze fixed on his mother as if fearing she might disappear if he looked away for even a second. Judge Montgomery, a man of stern countenance and a reputation for rigorous impartiality, examined the documents in front of him for several minutes in a silence that seemed to amplify the tension in the room. When he finally looked up, his gaze fell first on Camila, then on the district attorney, who looked uncomfortably aware of the shakiness of his original case. "This court has convened today to reconsider the State versus Camila Alvarez case, in which Ms. Alvarez was convicted of grand larceny. New evidence has been presented that demands our immediate attention," the judge declared, his voice echoing through the hushed chamber. The prosecutor rose, visibly chagrined. "Your Honor, in light of the new conclusive evidence presented by the police, the State hereby withdraws all charges against Mrs. Alvarez and acknowledges that a grave miscarriage of justice has occurred. We request the immediate vacating of her conviction and the release of the defendant, with our most sincere apologies." His words sparked a wave of murmurs throughout the courtroom as Camila covered her face with her hands, tears of relief finally breaching the emotional fortress she had maintained over the past weeks. "This court appreciates the prosecutor's integrity in acknowledging the error," the judge responded, before turning to Camila. "Mrs. Alvarez, it is with profound regret that this court recognizes the injustice committed against you. Your conviction is hereby officially vacated, your civil rights fully restored, and your criminal record will be immediately expunged." The judge's gavel echoed like a gunshot in the chamber, sealing Camila's release and prompting an explosion of cheers and applause that the judge made no effort to silence. It was at this moment that Richard Thompson rose from his seat, walking heavily to the center of the room, as one burdened by an invisible weight. "Your Honor, if the court would permit, I would like to make a statement." The judge nodded, allowing the hotel manager to address not just the court but Camila herself. "Mrs. Alvarez, no apology can be enough for what my negligence and prejudice have cost you and your family," he began, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "I spoke of trusting in your honesty during that job interview, but at the first accusation, the first hint of suspicion, I abandoned that trust without questioning, without properly investigating. I took the word of those I considered trustworthy, completely disregarding the possibility that you were being deliberately framed." Thompson paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "My failure of judgment cost you weeks of your life, separated you from your son, unjustly tarnished your reputation. There is no compensation that can erase that suffering, but I vow to do everything in my power to correct what injustice I can." Camila stared at the man who had been partly responsible for her nightmare, finding in his eyes a genuine remorse that made it impossible to maintain the resentment in her already overburdened heart. With a slight nod of acknowledgement, she turned her attention to what really mattered. Mateo, who had escaped Rosa's grip and was now running down the central aisle of the courtroom, ignoring all legal protocols in his eagerness to reach his mother's arms. When the boy finally reached her, Camila lifted him in a tight embrace, burying her face in his hair, finally allowing herself to believe that the nightmare had, in fact, ended. The prison gates opened for Camila on the morning after the trial, the spring sun bathing her skin like a blessing after weeks confined between grey walls and artificial lights. The fresh air filled her lungs with the promise of a new beginning, while her eyes adjusted to the brightness and eagerly sought the two figures waiting across the street. Rosa and Mateo were there, exactly as she had dreamed during countless sleepless nights in her cold cell, the boy holding a small bouquet of wildflowers picked on the way to the prison. "Mommy! Mommy!" Mateo cried, pulling away from Rosa's hand and running desperately towards his mother. Camilla knelt down, opening her arms to receive her little treasure, feeling the impact of his warm little body against hers as an anchor that finally reconnected her to real life. The familiar scent of her son, the texture of his hair between her fingers, the sound of his laughter mixed with sobs of joy. Each sensation was a miracle that Camilla absorbed with almost painful gratitude. "I'll never leave you again, my love. Never again," she whispered, words that were both promise and prayer. Rosa joined them, forming a triple embrace that sealed the unity of that makeshift little family that had faced the worst and survived. "You're free, Camilla. Truly free," Rosa said, her voice choked with emotion as she handed her friend a bag containing clean clothes, the first normal pieces of clothing Camilla would wear after the nightmare of prison. In Rosa's car, as they drove away from that place of suffering, Camilla observed the urban landscape with new eyes, rediscovering the world like someone returning from a long and perilous journey. "Thompson called this morning," Rosa commented, glancing at Camilla as she drove. "Besides the compensation the hotel is already processing, he offered you your job back, with a promotion and a raise." Camilla nodded silently, still processing how quickly her life had been transformed. 24 hours ago, she was a hopeless prisoner. Now, she had not only her freedom back, but also prospects for a better future. "Maybe I'll accept," she finally replied, "but not immediately. I need time with Matteo first. We need to heal together." Their first stop wasn't the small apartment Rosa had kept for them, nor any place of celebration. It was at the city cemetery, where Javier rested under a simple headstone shaded by a young oak tree. Camilla walked slowly across the grass between the graves, firmly holding Matteo's hand, a single white chrysanthemum in the other. The boy had brought his own gift, a colorful drawing showing their complete family, including his father smiling down at them from heaven. "Javier, my love," Camilla murmured, kneeling before the headstone and gently placing the flower on the cold marble. "We've been through so much since you left. There were moments when I thought I wouldn't make it, that the weight was too much." Her tears fell silently, but they were different from the ones she'd shed in prison. Not tears of despair, but of purification, of release. "But we survived. We faced injustice and prevailed. I promise you I'll be even stronger now. For Matteo, for us." Matteo placed his drawing beside the flower, reverently touching his father's name engraved on the stone. "Daddy, Mommy was so brave," he said with the profound simplicity of children. "And now she's back with me. Like you said, the angels always come back to those they love." Camilla embraced her son, surprised by his words, as a gentle breeze rustled the oak leaves above them, like a whisper of approval from another world. Standing once more, Camilla took one last look at Javier's grave before turning towards the future that awaited her. The journey had been brutal, but it had transformed her, refining her like gold in fire. Now, with Matteo secure by her side, and injustice finally defeated, she walked out of the cemetery with light steps of one who had finally rediscovered not only freedom, but also her own inner strength. The courtroom was packed on the day of Veronica Hastings and Ashley Miller's final trial. Camilla occupied a seat in the front row, alongside Rosa and Richard Thompson, silently watching the two women who had destroyed her life seated at the defendant's bench. Veronica kept her chin raised, her rigid posture contrasting with Ashley's hunched figure, who seemed to have shrunken since prison. Judge Montgomery entered the room, prompting the immediate silence of the crowd anxiously awaiting the outcome of this case that had shocked the community. "All rise for the reading of the sentence," announced the court officer. Veronica stood up with the rehearsed elegance that had always characterized her, but her eyes betrayed the fear that was finally starting to penetrate her armor of arrogance. Ashley visibly trembled, silent tears streaming down her face as she stared at the ground. "Veronica Hastings and Ashley Miller," the judge began, his deep voice echoing through the room. "This court has found you guilty of multiple counts of aggravated theft, criminal conspiracy, evidence tampering, and deliberate false incrimination of an innocent party." He paused, examining the two women with a stern gaze over his reading glasses. "Your crimes were not only against the guests of the Imperial Hotel, but primarily against Camila Alvarez, a hard-working single mother who was unjustly deprived of her freedom and separated from her son." The tension in the room was palpable as the judge consulted his documents. Veronica swallowed hard, the reality of her situation finally imposing itself over her conviction that she would get away unscathed. "This court sentences each of you to 5 years in prison for aggravated theft, 2 years for criminal conspiracy, and 3 years for evidence tampering and deliberate false incrimination, totaling 10 years. A murmur rippled through the room, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Additionally, as part of the sentence, you will both perform mandatory community service during the first 2 years of incarceration in the form of street cleaning work 3 times a week in public locations around the city. The judge leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. It is the wish of this court that, as you clean the streets under the watchful eye of the community you betrayed, you reflect on the true meaning of honesty, dignified labor, and the devastating consequences your actions had on an innocent family. Ashley broke into open sobs as Veronica finally lost her composure, her face twisting into an expression of despair as the officers of justice approached to lead them back to detention. This is an outrage. I am a respected professional. I cannot clean streets like a... Her words were cut off by the definitive sound of the judge's gavel. The sentence was pronounced. The defendants will be escorted immediately to begin serving their sentence, declared the judge, officially closing the case that had kept the city in suspense for weeks. As the 2 women were led out of the courtroom, Veronica cast one last look at Camilla, no longer one of disdain or superiority, but of impotent hatred in the face of the justice that had finally reached those who considered themselves above it. Camilla observed in silence, without celebration or revenge in her heart, only the solemn relief of one who finally saw the truth prevail after the storm of injustice. The relentless August sun punished the city's Central Park as Veronica Hastings and Ashley Miller, dressed in the screaming orange uniforms that immediately identified them as inmates, collected trash under the watchful eye of a prison guard. Their unprotected hands, now calloused and rough, gathered fast food wrappers, soda cans, and other debris left by careless visitors. Sweat trickled down Veronica's face, ruining what remained of her carefully applied makeup before dawn, a ritual she maintained as the last vestige of her former identity, even knowing it would be destroyed within minutes under the heat and strenuous work. "Hastings, you missed a paper there," shouted Guard Dawson, pointing to a dirty napkin blowing a few meters ahead. Veronica gritted her teeth, humiliated by the way she was treated by the man who, months earlier, had respectfully greeted her when providing security at the hotel where she reigned as an executive assistant. The same guard who now smiled maliciously at seeing her crawling through the grass after discarded trash. "We don't have all day, Princess," he added, prompting snickers from other inmates working nearby. A family passed by them, the parents instinctively pulling their children closer, as if criminality were a contagious disease. The woman whispered something to her husband, loud enough for Veronica to hear. "Look, those are the ones from the Imperial Hotel scandal who put that maid in jail." The look of disgust they cast her way cut deeper than any verbal insult could. Veronica lowered her head, focusing on the repetitive motion of spearing papers with her collection tool, fighting against the humiliation that threatened to suffocate her. Ashley worked a few meters ahead, her face swollen from the tears that never seemed to cease completely. "Don't look now," she muttered as she approached to empty her trash bag, but Edward Collins just arrived with his family. Veronica froze, recognizing the name of the oil tycoon who frequently stayed in the presidential suite at the Imperial. Collins had been particularly fond of Veronica, often praising her efficiency and leaving generous tips that she used to supplement her luxury wardrobe. Before she could decide whether to hide or maintain what little dignity she had left, Collins's booming voice cut through the air. "Well, well, if it isn't Miss Hastings in her new corporate uniform," he exclaimed, prompting laughter from his wife and teenage children. "I must say that orange isn't quite as sophisticated as those Chanel suits you love to flaunt." The man approached, observing her like a zoo exhibit, as other park patrons began to gather, recognizing the unfolding drama. "Are you satisfied, Mr. Collins?" Veronica responded, a final spark of her former pride briefly emerging. "Did you come here specifically to see me in this situation?" Her attempt to preserve some dignity crumbled when Collins simply laughed, shaking his head as if witnessing a particularly sad spectacle. "Actually, I've scheduled a lunch with Richard Thompson to discuss my next stay at the Imperial. Finding you here was just, what do you call it? Ah yes, poetic justice." Collins walked away, but the spectacle of public humiliation was far from over. 3 maids from the hotel, taking advantage of their day off, stopped to observe their former supervisors collecting trash. "Look who's doing the cleaning now," one commented loudly enough to be heard. "Remember how she humiliated me for forgetting to restock the bath salts in that room on the 8th floor? The others nodded, openly laughing at the role reversal life had provided. The worst part, however, came when Maria, the receptionist Veronica had threatened to fire for being 5 minutes late, deliberately approached, pushing a stroller. "My friends won't believe this," she said, taking her phone out of her pocket and pointing it at Veronica. "Can I take a picture to document how karma works?" Before Veronica could protest, the flash went off, capturing her in her moment of complete degradation. Sweaty, dirty, humiliated, bent over to pick up a melted ice cream wrapper. Guard Dawson, far from intervening, merely smiled as he observed the scene. 10 more minutes of break and we're heading back to the main avenue, he announced, checking his watch. There's a food fair happening there today, so expect plenty of work and plenty of audience. The prospect of further public humiliation made Ashley stifle a sob, while Veronica stared blankly at the horizon. In that moment, watching people pass by, some ignoring her completely, others slowing their pace to gawk at her degradation with morbid curiosity, Veronica finally understood the magnitude of what she had lost. It wasn't just the material luxuries, the status or the power she wielded at the hotel. It was her very humanity, the basic respect everyone deserves, the dignity she had so cruelly stripped from Camilla. Now collecting the trash left by people who once would have treated her with deference, Veronica Hastings was finally forced to confront the most honest reflection of herself, not in the crystal mirrors of the Imperial, but in the looks of disdain from a society that had uncovered her true nature. The silver sedan slowed down as it passed by the avenue where the orange-clad inmates were collecting trash under the scorching sun. Camilla briefly observed the scene, her hands firm on the steering wheel, while Mateo played absent-mindedly with his toy car. "Mommy, look, those are the bad women," the boy pointed out, recognizing the hunched figures on the curb. It was at this moment that Veronica looked up, her dirty, sweaty face meeting Camilla's through the window. Time seemed to freeze in that instant of recognition. The woman who had tried to destroy a life, and the one who, against all odds, had rebuilt her own. A serene smile, not of scorn but of peace, lit up Camilla's face. Veronica could not hold her gaze, lowering her head in deep shame, her body shrinking under the weight of her own actions. The traffic light turned green, and Camilla gently accelerated, adjusting the rearview mirror so that the past was completely out of sight. Her attention turned to the road ahead, to her son, to the future that now finally belonged to them, free from the shadows of injustice that had tried to consume them. Did you like the story of Camilla and Mateo? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one waiting for you right here on the screen. I'll see you there.